Good evening, everyone. For those just joining, I want to again thank you for taking time to be here with us virtually today. Today, we will be covering two proposed EPA actions to reduce ethylene oxide risk at commercial sterilization and healthcare facilities. These actions, if finalized, would apply to the International Sterilization Laboratory commercial sterilizer facility in Groveland, Florida. I'm Rachel McCullough from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, and I'm the moderator for today's meeting. We are here today because our mission at EPA is to protect human health and the environment. And because EPA is taking a series of actions to reduce health risks from a specific chemical, ethylene oxide, that is both a source of air pollution in America and a source of potential risk to workers who work with this chemical. Today, we'll share background information about these health risks and the significant steps EPA is taking to protect workers who are exposed to this chemical, as well as the people who live, work, play, or go to school or daycare near facilities that use it. And we'll also talk about how you can get involved in providing input on EPA's actions. We understand it can be hard to learn about potential health risks you may be facing. Because some of the information for how EPA is addressing this risk can be pretty technical, I want to acknowledge that this is not necessarily an easy conversation we're going to have here today. As an agency, we are committed to meaningful community engagement and discussion on what environmental contaminants are impacting communities. That is why we are here today. We strongly believe that this communication is important and that for us to best protect health, we need to share the information we have with you all. It is also important that we do that in a way that is understandable and that helps inform decisions you might be making about your own lives. This is part of why we have a lot of time set aside today to take questions from you. If we say things today that are hard to follow, we speak with too much technical language, or we just don't cover things that are important to you, please let us know, and we will take the time to explain things a different way. Before we turn to the presentations, I want to take a time to explain in more detail how the question and answer sections will work. We're going to answer questions at different points throughout, after all the presentations are completed, and then at the end. Please feel free to submit a written question at any time using the Q&A feature on Zoom, which is one of the buttons at the bottom of your screen. Any comment you have about the proposed actions should be submitted via the regulations.gov website as a written comment. We will provide written answers to some questions as they come in, and for some others, I will read the question and our panelists will answer out loud. We're going to do our best to answer as many questions as possible today. That may mean that we group similar questions together for our panelists. I may also ask our panelists to clarify or add detail if I feel an answer was unclear. If you feel your question is important and we didn't get to it, or if you feel that answer to your question wasn't clear or quite what you were looking for, please know you can always email us at EtO@EPA.gov. And we will work to answer your question there in the coming days. This is an informational meeting and we will do our best to answer your general questions, which you submit via the Q&A. If you wish to have your comments and concerns included on the record as part of the formal process for any of the EPA actions we are discussing today, that is a separate process. There are several ways to make your voice heard, and we will be discussing those in more detail as part of our presentations. So, with those instructions out of the way, I'd like to introduce you to those you'll hear from today. We will have a panel of EPA experts, including Caroline Freeman, Director of the Air and Radiation Division, Anthony Toney, Deputy Division Director of the Air and Radiation Division, Seneca Anderson, an engineer in the Air and Radiation Division, and Aaron Jones, Emerging Contaminants Coordinator. We will also have technical experts available for the Q&A session, including our partners at the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry and the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. The Q&A session is limited to the current rule and the risks that have been identified. Please be mindful that we are unable to accept verbal comments on the proposed rule and action, as those must be submitted formally online or via mail. As we get started with today's presentation, I would like to turn it over to Anthony Toney. Toney is the EPA Region 4 Air and Radiation Deputy Division Director, where he oversees a team of technical experts working on air issues in Region 4. Tony works closely with local, tribal, and state governments, like the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, industry, and others to achieve and maintain clean indoor and outdoor air, including reduction of exposures and risks associated with criteria and hazardous air pollutants, like the EtO risk from the commercial sterilizer in your community. Tony, I'll now turn it over to you. One moment while Tony comes off mute, please.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, all right. As I was saying, first of all, thank you, Rachel, for the introduction. And on behalf of our acting regional administrator, Janine Ghetto, our acting deputy regional administrator, Carol Kemker, and my division director, Caroline Freeman, who is on the line, and you will hear from her later on in today's presentation. I do want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to be here with us today. At EPA, it is our mission to protect human health and the environment. You've already heard that there's a pollution in this community. It is coming from an air toxic that is called ethylene oxide, which we often refer to as EtO. At different times during this conversation, we're going to share with you the information on the long-term health risk posed by the inhalation of uncontrolled ethylene oxide emissions from the International Sterilization Laboratory facility that's located at 217 Sampe Road in Groveland, Florida. Again, we're here today to provide you with the background on ethylene oxide and its impact, as well as talk to you about the recently proposed EPA actions designed to reduce risks from EtO and to encourage you to comment on these proposed actions that are currently published. Let's review briefly what we know about ethylene oxide and its uses. Ethylene oxide is called by many different names. So during this presentation, you will hear us say EtO, EO, or ethylene oxide. We're all talking about the same exact chemical. You usually can't smell it, you can't see it, and definitely will not be able to identify it. EtO in the amounts that we're talking about in the air near this facility. EtO is used for two main purposes. The first, in the chemical manufacturing process, EtO is used as a building block to make antifreeze, and in some processes, plastic bottles or other consumer goods. We're not concerned about the risk to you from that type of use of EtO in this community. The second is the use of EtO in the commercial sterilization industry at facilities like International Sterilization Laboratory, which is located here in Groveland, Florida. At International Sterilization Laboratory, EtO is used to sterilize orthopedic devices, surgical equipment, wound care kits, and other medical supplies. For this conversation, the EtO of concern is coming out of the International Sterilization Laboratory facility as an air pollution only. Based on the information available to us, we have no indication that EtO is being discharged into the water or onto the ground in any way that will cause a risk or harm. We have learned that EtO is more toxic than we previously thought, and that it can cause cancer when people are exposed over long periods of time. Specifically, EtO can cause breast cancer, cancers of the blood, and lymphatic system. By long periods of exposure, we mean when people who live near these facilities breathe EtO every single day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, from birth until the age 70. It is important to point out that some people are more at risk from exposure to EtO than others, either because they spend more of their time in areas where there's a lot of EtO, like workers in a facility such as this one, or it can happen because for some reason their bodies are more susceptible. Children and babies are more vulnerable to EtO exposure, And because we know that children are more vulnerable, we explicitly consider that in our analysis. We are here so that we can tell you about our proposed actions to deal with the risks of exposure to EtO. We have proposed 3 separate regulatory actions to lower emissions of EtO into the air and reduce the health risks that it poses. We believe the best way to reduce risk from EtO is to, number 1, reduce its usage, and number 2, reduce the amount that is emitted into the environment. First, we have proposed more stringent standards under the National Pesticides Control Law, the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act, or as we commonly call it, FIFRA. These more stringent requirements will apply to all uses of EtO as a pesticide or sterilizing agent and are designed to provide greater protection to workers and the communities. Secondly, we have proposed to strengthen our existing federal regulation that governs air emissions from commercial scale sterilizers like International Sterilization Laboratory. These proposed changes are designed to significantly reduce air emissions from these facilities and reduce the risks around the surrounding communities. Thirdly, we have proposed to strengthen our federal regulations that govern air emissions from chemical manufacturing plants. We won't focus on this proposal action today because there are no chemical manufacturers who use EtO in the Groveland area. Seneca and Aaron will be sharing more details about the first 2 proposed actions in a few minutes and how those proposed actions will reduce EtO usage and minimize emissions. I'm going to share a little more detail about the analysis we have conducted and what it tells us about these facilities. EPA scientists analyzed the best information and data available to us, some of which were collected from these facilities in 2021 and 2022. The EPA then combined that data with other local information like weather patterns and the location of homes in the surrounding communities. Using these factors, EPA was able to model the risks of EtO. I want to note that EPA's analysis only reflects your potential exposure to risks related to EtO from the International Sterilization Laboratory. The risk I'm sharing information about today is in addition to or incremental long-term risk of getting certain cancers from EtO that we have modeled. To estimate risk from a given chemical, we need to know 3 things. 1, how toxic the chemical is and how close it is to the source. 2, how much of the chemical is in the air. And 3, how long throughout a person's life he or she may have been exposed to that chemical. Because EPA analysis must be protective of human health, we use estimates of how long people are exposed that are on the extremely high end. For exposure to EtO, we're talking about people who live near International Sterilization Laboratory. Additionally, for community exposure, we assume that people spend all of their time in the area where the risk exists. Specifically, we assume exposure for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, from birth to the age 70. People are breathing EtO into the area where the risk is. That might not be true or realistic assumptions because almost everyone leaves their home at some point. But these assumptions do ensure that we are being protective of human health for everybody, even those at most extreme situations. For worker exposure, we assume exposure to EtO for 8 hours a day, 240 days a week for a period of 35 years. And we also take into account any worker protections that are in place, such as personnel protective equipment. The gradient map displayed on this slide is used to show EtO risk from International Sterilization Laboratory. I would also preface that we believe that there is elevated risk to people who live near International Sterilization Laboratory. But I want to be clear that there's also potential risk to people who live in these communities, work at these factories, go to school, and are nearby these facilities. Now, I want to point out a few things on the map. The dark orange box is the facility itself. The lighter orange area is the non-residential area near the facility where risks are high. The blue area includes residential areas where the risks are or at 100 in a million. The risk impact extends from International Sterilization Laboratory facility, roughly 2,000 feet in all directions, eastward to Beverly Drive, westward to Timber Village Road, northward to Fender Road, and southward to Curtis Avenue. The schools near the risk boundary are the Integrity Christian Academy to the southeast and Groveland Elementary School to the southwest of the facility, but these schools are outside of the zone with the elevated risk. In the blue area, the darker shade reflects higher risks and the lighter shade reflects lower risks, albeit still at or above 100 in a million. Note that as you move away from the facility, the blue shading area gets lighter, meaning that the risks get lower. I want to note that there's some uncertainty in these estimates as both operations at the facility and weather patterns can change, but these are the best health risk protective estimates that we have available. A couple of times I've used the terminology 100 in a million. At EPA, we use 100 in a million as our benchmark for identifying whether risks level are considered high and are of concern to EPA. When we say 100 in a million, we're saying that we estimate EtO exposure could contribute to the increase of 100 cancer cases if 1 million people were exposed at the concentrated level for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, from birth to the age 70. We start our calculations at birth because we want to make sure that we are protective of children. Under the Clean Air Act, we focus our risks where people live. We're also concerned about risks to workers and others who might spend part of their time in the light yellow or non-residential area and in the facility itself. But for these analyses, EPA focuses its modeled risk on the residential areas, the blue shaded areas surrounding the facility. We will share more on actions that EPA is taking to address risk to workers and others who spend increased time in these non-residential areas near the facility in a moment. The information we're sharing today and that we have posted on the web is all based on information the EPA collected from international sterilization laboratories about their EtO usage. In many areas, several facilities have already taken actions to reduce EtO pollution, and others are planning to do more to reduce the EtO fugitive emissions from their facilities. At EPA, we're very concerned about the risk to this community. We have also learned that EtO is not a chemical that lasts for a long time in the environment, like lead or one of our forever chemicals, PFAS, that you may have been hearing about in the news. By reducing the amount of EtO coming out of this facility, it will also reduce risk to the neighborhood community right away. Again, today our focus is on International Sterilization Laboratories located at 217 Sampy Road here in Groveland, Florida. The facility has been using EtO to sterilize medical supplies and equipment since 1992. I thank you for your time and attention today, and at this time, I'll turn the presentation back over to our moderator, Rachel, for some additional information. Rachel?
Thank you for that information, Tony. For those who are just joining us, you can use the Q&A button so that you may privately submit questions. If you are having any trouble accessing the features in Zoom, please reach out using the Q&A feature. If you are listening on your phone and cannot access the Q&A function, press *9 to let us know you're having technical issues. Once we identify you by the last 4 digits of your phone number, press *6 to unmute. At this time, we're going to continue on with our next presentation. I'll now turn things over to Seneca Anderson, who will be providing information on the proposed rule for commercial sterilizers who use ethylene oxide. Seneca?
Hello, thank you, Rachel. Thank you all for the opportunity to speak to you tonight. I am Seneca Anderson, and I work in the Regulatory, Communities, and Air Toxics section in the Air and Radiation Division at EPA's Region 4 office. The short version of that is that I am an environmental engineer on Tony's staff. Today, I will be talking to you about the more technical aspects of EPA's proposed action under the Clean Air Act and how it will reduce emissions of EtO from commercial sterilizers like the International Sterilization Laboratories facility here in Groveland. As Tony mentioned earlier, EPA is proposing 3 actions to reduce emissions of EtO. I will be continuing Tony's overview of the proposed rule for commercial sterilizers under the Clean Air Act with some technical details on how this proposed regulation will reduce EtO emissions from these types of facilities. That's the orange circle there in the middle. To briefly touch on the Clean Air Act, which is a federal law, gives EPA the authority to regulate sources of air pollution. Additionally, the Clean Air Act amendments of 1990 authorize EPA to regulate a subset of air toxics called hazardous air pollutants. There is a specific list of these pollutants, and EtO is on that list. So EPA is using its authority under the Act to propose this regulation to further reduce emissions of EtO. All right. First, I want to provide a little national context. There are currently 86 of these commercial sterilizers operating in the country. You can see where they are located on the map here. The blue dots show the locations of the 25 sterilizers where we anticipate risk to be the highest for the people who live nearby. International Sterilization Laboratories is one of those 25 facilities with the highest anticipated level of risk. We are focusing the conversation today on this facility because we believe there is a higher risk to people who live nearby, but there is also potential risk to people who work in these facilities or who work or go to school nearby. We considered all 86 of these sterilizers when we developed solutions to reduce emissions in our proposed regulation. Now, where this pollution is coming from within the facility is important because this helps us to understand how solutions can be put into place to reduce the EtO risk from this facility. There are 2 types of ways that EtO can leave a facility. The first is that after EtO is used to sterilize objects, it is sucked into a control system. These systems actually clean EtO out of the air and capture it or break it down so that the EtO released is a much smaller amount. This type of emissions coming out of a facility is called controlled emissions. International Sterilization Laboratory uses a highly effective liquid scrubbing system to remove EtO from the exhaust air of the sterilization chambers and aeration rooms. The second type of emissions is from EtO that doesn't get sucked into these control systems. It is EtO that escapes through other places, leaks and gaps, or windows and doors. This escaping EtO is sometimes called fugitive emissions because it is EtO that is not captured by a control system. Unfortunately, fugitive emissions are not covered under the current regulation because when that regulation was written, the importance of fugitive emissions was not well understood. At International Sterilization Laboratory, the majority of the EtO risk is resulting from these escaping or fugitive emissions. We estimate that 45% of the EtO emissions from International Sterilization Laboratory is in the form of controlled stack emissions, and 55% is in the form of uncontrolled fugitive emissions. The best solution to reduce EtO risk from this facility is to reduce its emissions of EtO entering the environment. Our proposed regulation under the Clean Air Act will require greater control of the stack emissions that are passing through the control equipment, but more importantly, it will also require capture and elimination of fugitive emissions that are not currently being controlled. We estimate that our proposed regulation will reduce EtO emissions from all commercial sterilizers across the country by 19 tons per year, which is about an 80% reduction nationwide. More importantly, our proposed regulation will ensure that the lifetime cancer risk will be below 100 in a million in every community located near any one of these facilities, including here in Groveland. We are proposing a compliance deadline of 18 months after we issue our final rule, instead of the usual 3-year period that is allowed in the Clean Air Act. And we are requesting comments from the public about this proposed compliance deadline. I want to reiterate, just hit it again, that by reducing the amount of EtO coming out of this facility, the risk to the community will also be reduced. To ensure that our proposed regulation will result in lower EtO emissions, we are also proposing to improve international sterilization laboratories and other commercial sterilizers' accountability by requiring more robust testing, monitoring, and reporting of EtO emissions. We are proposing to significantly increase the monitoring requirements of EtO emissions to include continuous monitoring, and we are requesting comments on the rule as proposed. To summarize, our proposed action under the Clean Air Act will significantly reduce EtO emissions from commercial sterilizers like International Sterilization Laboratory through a combination of control equipment for so-called fugitive emissions, tougher standards for stack emissions that are already being controlled, and improved accountability through more thorough testing, monitoring, and reporting requirements. Now, you've heard me say a few times that EPA is requesting comments on the rule as proposed. Specifically, there are 82 topics that EPA is especially interested in receiving comments on, although you can comment on any aspect of the rule. These 82 topics are identified in the text of the rule with a numbering system. There's an example of here on this slide. It has the letter C followed by a sequential number, such as C-1, C-2, and so on up to C-82. We have an example here on this slide for the proposed emission standard for sterilization chamber vents, or SCV as shown on the slide, which is topic number C8. When you are reading the proposed rule, you can just scan for the topic numbers or do a computer search for C- and whatever number you're interested in. Now, just to hit the timeline, our proposed regulation was published in the Federal Register on April 13th. The comment period, which is open now, extends to June 27th, and we are conducting webinars and meetings at the national and local level through the end of the comment period. We expect to issue our final rule within 1 year of the end of the comment period, and we are proposing a compliance deadline of 18 months once the final rule is issued. This concludes our presentation on the proposed regulation under the Clean Air Act. Now, Rachel will introduce our next speaker to talk about the proposed FIFRA action.
Thank you, Thank you, Seneca. I would just like to remind everyone that you can place your questions in the Q&A area in Zoom. We will also offer an opportunity at the end of the meeting. Now we are going to transition to Aaron Jones, the Emerging Contaminants Coordinator in EPA Region 4. Aaron is here to talk with you today about EPA's proposed actions to address EtO under our EPA Office of Chemical Safety and Pollution Prevention. Aaron?
Thank you, Rachel, and I'm so glad to be with you all here tonight. So again, in my role as the Emerging Contaminants Coordinator in our region, much of my work focuses on the evolving issues that reflect the newest and the best science available to EPA. And so that's the space that we're in right now, where we have proposed rules out that are incorporating that best science, and EPA is taking those next policy and regulatory steps to incorporate that science and ensure protection of human health and the environment. So once again, this slide is reminding us of those 3 actions EPA is proposing to take to address EtO. Specifically, I'm going to be talking to you now about the first action in the yellow circle. So this action, if finalized as written, will apply to anyone who uses EtO as a sterilizer, and that includes, but it's not limited to, commercial sterilizers such as International Sterilization Laboratory, but also includes locations such as healthcare facilities. So while EPA regulates EtO under a number of different environmental laws, the agency's current efforts to reduce this chemicals risk fall into two main categories: EtO as an air toxic under the Clean Air Act, which you just heard from my colleagues in our air division about, and EtO as a pesticide under the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act, or FIFRA, which is what I'm going to keep calling it from here on out. I'm going to now tell you about that act, but the authority of that FIFRA is that we can regulate pesticides under federal law. And when EtO is used to sterilize products, it's considered to be a pesticide. As part of our mandate under FIFRA, EPA's Chemical Safety Office reevaluates existing pesticides as part of our registration review program. So we reassess the safety of each currently registered pesticide every 15 years as part of our risk assessment process. And we take any needed steps, or what we call mitigation measures, to address any risks that we find. And the way that we do that is generally not by proposing rules, which is the way that our air office proceeds, but by proposing changes to what is essentially a license or the label that defines how the pesticide should be used. And we do that in a proposed interim decision, or PID. So you'll hear me say PID, PID or pesticide action multiple times tonight. In April, we used our authority under FIFRA to propose a comprehensive set of new mitigation measures to protect people facing long-term exposures to this dangerous chemical that's known to increase certain types of cancer. Our proposal would protect both the workers who are exposed to EtO on the job, as well as people who live, work, or go to school or daycare near sterilization facilities that emit EtO. These proposed actions would be applicable nationally to anyone that uses EtO as a sterilizer, not just large commercial sterilization facilities treating medical devices, but again, all facilities that use EtO to sterilize things. This includes some healthcare facilities and facilities that sterilize things like dried herbs and spices to prevent illness caused by Salmonella and E. coli. Our proposal also reflects significant coordination with the Food and Drug Administration, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and the Occupational Health and Safety Administration to deliver risk reductions while we maintain those critical sterilization capabilities. The actions we've proposed are driven by the latest available science, including a new agency analysis showing that the risks to workers who sterilize products over the course of a 35-year career are more significant than we previously thought. So first, we're proposing to prohibit the use of EtO where it's not needed, because there are effective alternatives that exist. And this includes its uses in museums, archival settings, beekeeping equipment in North Carolina, cosmetics, and musical instruments. Next, we've proposed several measures to reduce the risk from EtO in settings where no effective alternative exists, like sterilizing certain medical equipment and the dried herbs and spices. Generally, these measures are aimed at reducing the amount of EtO that's used and decreasing the workers' exposure to EtO by automating processes. For workers, we're proposing to reduce the amount of EtO that's used to sterilize medical devices, while still making sure that those FDA requirements for sterility are met. Our proposal also includes requiring engineering controls such as automation, separating HVAC systems between offices and EtO sterilization areas, increasing ventilation in EtO storage areas, and other emissions capture technologies so that we reduce exposures to workers during the sterilization process. And we're expanding personal protective equipment, or PPE, requirements to ensure that workers in a sterilization facility wear that PPE during certain tasks of the sterilization process when EtO exposures could be higher. In addition, we're setting a new requirement that all workers in the facility wear that PPE when EtO concentrations exceed 10 parts per billion based on real-time monitoring. And so that's even for employees in the facility who aren't working directly with EtO. And 10 ppb is the lowest real-time concentration of EtO that can be quantified in commercial sterilization facilities using today's technology. We're also proposing new engineering controls for healthcare facilities that sterilize medical equipment, such as negative air pressure in rooms containing EtO sterilization devices and the use of abatement devices that will remove EtO from exhaust air and reduce discharge to the environment. And these are just a few examples. Additionally, this proposal includes new data collection and reporting requirements in commercial sterilization facilities that will help identify and improve protective monitoring technologies and assess the effectiveness of the proposed mitigation measures over time. So based on this data that we'll collect, we intend to initiate the next round of registration review for EtO earlier than the typical 15-year timeframe, so that we can take faster action to incorporate any needed additional protections, and as well as account for any advances in technology. Although we know from our extensive engagement with EtO industry representatives that many of these measures are already being implemented at some facilities, our proposal is now going to require these measures at all EtO commercial sterilization facilities to protect all workers. And some of the measures could be implemented quickly at all facilities, such as the PPE requirement, while others could take longer, such as engineering controls. We're committed to taking additional action when the data that we collect shows that more protection is needed and when new processes or technological advances can further reduce exposures. So taken together with EPA's proposed air emission standards rule that you heard about earlier, these actions represent a comprehensive approach to increase safety in our communities for workers and for all who are exposed to this air toxic at school or at work, while providing a path for these facilities to continue to fill the critical national need for sterilized medical supplies. Moving forward, we're encouraging stakeholders, including communities, industry, and public health leaders to participate in our public comment process as the agency strives to reduce the risk from EtO. So the public comment process for this action also closes on June 27th, and in a moment, we'll walk everyone through the details about how to learn more about EtO and the process to comment. So once the comment period closes, it typically takes EPA about a year to address those comments and make a proposed decision final. So we'll publish our interim decision at that time. And then, depending on the protective measures, it could take from 1 to 5 years for facilities to fully comply. The timeline for implementation of each measure is something we're taking public comment on as part of the open comment period. And throughout this process, we'll continue to work to ensure that the public, especially in impacted communities, has access to the information they need to make informed, independent judgments about the risk and to increase public involvement in the regulatory process. So now back to Rachel to allow us to address any questions on the two actions that you just heard about from me and from Seneca.
Thank you, Erin. We'll take a few questions from the Q&A module. I want to reiterate that if you wish to have your comments and concerns included on the record as part of the formal process for any of the EPA actions we are discussing today, you can do that separately. There are several ways to make your voice heard, and at this time, we will be answering your questions about the information presented here today. In addition to our EPA speakers that you've heard from already, we have several additional experts and partners with us today who may help address certain questions to ensure we provide the fullest answer. The panel is coming off camera now, and I'll introduce them briefly. Caroline Freeman, Division Director for the EPA Region 4 Air and Radiation Division. Hastings Reed, Florida Department of Environmental Protection Air Division Deputy Director. Dr. Rashidra Walker, toxicologist in the EPA Region 4 Air and Radiation Division. And Sarah Watterson, a monitoring expert in the EPA Region 4's Air and Radiation Division. Okay. So at this time, we have received one question that's been answered in the Q&A chat. I'll read it out for those who can't see it because you're on the phone. The map says 200 in a million, but he said 100 in a million. The blue area on the map represents risks ranging from 100 in a million up to a maximum risk of 200 in a million. So that blue area is for 100 a million to 200. All righty. Are there any other questions?
Rachel, I can just add a little bit to that. On the map, the dark blue part is the 200 in a million, and then it tapers off gradually, that's the gradient part of the map, and the light blue, everywhere that's the lightest blue is 100 in a million.
Thank you, Seneca. Thank you. If you have questions, feel free to place them in the Q&A chat. Also, you can raise your hand and we can acknowledge you on Zoom. That's under the reactions button. If you're on the phone, just press *9. And once we call your number, just press *6 and you can unmute. All right, panelists, we'll go ahead and continue with the last presentation, and then we'll come back to you, okay? At this time, we're going to continue on with our final presentation. We'll have a little bit more time for questions after this one. Please feel free to keep sharing your questions in the Q&A module. I want to reiterate that if you wish to have your comments and concerns included on the record as part of the formal process for any of the EPA actions we are discussing today, we will explain that process now. There are several ways to make your voice heard, and at this time, we will be presenting some information on the official public comment process. I'll turn things back over to Erin to walk us through that process.
Thank you, Rachel. So at this time, again, we're going to reflect on what we heard so far, and then we'll take an in-depth look at EPA's EtO webpage and discuss how you can comment on the two actions we've shared with you today. So again, to recap, EPA has learned that risk to workers and community members from EtO is too high, and we have proposed comprehensive solutions to reduce this risk. And we're seeking public comment on those proposed solutions. And so now we'll go to the next slide to learn more about that, but also I'm going to actually try to share my screen and hopefully be a little more useful to see the actual web page itself. And so hopefully that is showing now. This is the EPA EtO webpage. So it's www.epa.gov/EtO, and that's where that address will take you. And this is a great one-stop shop for everything that we've got going on with EtO. We can learn more about EtO here in this area. This area here's some plain language documents that is a great starting place if you're just starting to learn about EtO. This area here is all of our previous national webinars, outreach, and community engagements that we've done. And then here in the green box is how you can comment on our proposed EtO actions. So again, we have a summary of EtO meetings. We had a couple of public hearings about a month ago. And then the next 3 bullets are the proposed EtO actions that we've been talking about, the first 2 tonight, but there's the 3rd one as well. And so if you want to dig deeper on the air toxics rule, that's the 2nd bullet for the proposed interim decision for the use as a pesticide that I talked to you about. That's the middle bullet. And then most importantly, the bottom bullet is how to submit written comments. So if you click on that, you will go to this web page, and it details our Clean Air Act action first, and the ways in which you can submit comments on that action. You can email to an email address here and just make sure you put the docket number for that action, which is listed here in your subject line. You can also go to regulations.gov and make an electronic comment, and we'll take a deeper look at that in a second. Or you can also just mail a comment to this address here, and that will again make it to this Clean Air Act docket for that specific rule action. The next section is the proposed interim decision and how you can make official public comment on that. Unfortunately, they don't have an email address on the chemical safety side, the way that the docket is set up, but you can still make those regulations.gov electronic comments. You can also mail comments in to that docket via this address that's listed here. And so if we were to click on regulations.gov here for the Clean Air Act rule, this is what it would look like. It's got the entire docket that we're looking at here that's focused on the proposed rule itself right now. So you can directly comment with the blue button here. But if you do want to explore any other materials in the docket, that is under this tab right next to the comment button. So if you're ready to make your comment, you click comment, and it takes you to a page that looks like this. You can type in your comment. You can upload any files or any other materials that you want to submit as part of your comment. You put in your email address to receive confirmation of your submission. Let us know if you're an individual organization or if you want to stay anonymous. And just make sure that if you do make your comments this way, you scroll all the way down and officially submit it by clicking the button at the bottom here. So that hopefully was helpful to see the various ways to comment and how to learn a little more about EtO. I'm going to stop sharing my slides, and if we can pull the deck back up, we'll continue on with a summary slide that kind of pulls all that information together. We'll wait just a second for that slide deck to load up. And I'm seeing it. There we go. Thank you. So this again pulls everything together. We've got the main EPA webpage, which was the first place I went to. We've got an email address listed here. Again, where Rachel had indicated, if you have any questions going forward, you can email this address. You can make those comments again at regulations.gov. The docket numbers are in blue for the Clean Air Act and in green for the FIFRA action. And then, of course, please keep in mind that the comment period is open now through June 27th by midnight. If you do choose to mail in your comments, make sure you send them in enough time that they arrive by that date. But otherwise, the email or the regulations.gov comments, you can make them up until that last day. But we really are interested in getting all the public feedback that we can on these actions. And so we really encourage you to go through these steps. And if you've got any questions about how to do that, please feel free to ask tonight or email us. Rachel, I'll turn it back to you now.
Thank you, Erin. Now that we have shared that information on risks, EPA's proposed actions, and how to comment on those actions, we'd like to take a final round of questions from you all on the International Sterilization Laboratory Facility. Again, a reminder that if you wish to have your comments and concerns included on the record, as Erin described, as part of that formal process, that's a separate process. And you should take the extra steps that she just walked through in order to officially comment on our proposed actions. Please note again that if you mail your comments, it does need to arrive before June 27th. Now I'll turn to your questions. If you have any questions, feel free to either raise your hand using the reactions button or the Q&A button at the bottom if you would like to write them there, or *9 and *6 if you're on the phone. All righty. Hearing none, I want to thank you all for joining us today. I know that you are very busy, and I'd like to summarize what we presented today and highlight the next steps you can take to comment on our actions. Again, I'll watch the chat in case anything comes through. EPA has recently proposed new actions that will reduce risk from EtO. You can learn more about these actions at epa.gov/EtO. You can offer comment on the rule to reduce the amount of EtO coming out of the commercial sterilization facilities by submitting your public comment until June 27th by going to www.regulations.gov. You can also scan that QR code and type in the information for the appropriate comment docket, shown here on this slide once again, that Erin walked you through earlier. This webinar has been recorded and will be posted online within the next 5 days at epa.gov at the website you see on your screen, /Florida/Groveland. I won't read all that to you. Next slide, please. We would like to share our partners' contact information from ATSDR, the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry, on this slide, and you can email health-related questions to them at eto@cdc.gov. We also have information on how to reach the Pediatric Environmental Health Specialty Units, PESU, here. Thank you again and have a good evening.